Hi, Patricia Martucci here, licensed marriage and family therapist, licensed in New York, New Jersey, California. And I also work with eating disorders, addiction, OCD. I'm an EMDR therapist and somatic experiencing practitioner. So I'm here today to talk about an attachment style called disorganized attachment. And what disorganized attachment really, in essence, is saying that the source of my attachment is both a source of pleasure and pain. And so, if we have somebody in our life growing up, our primary attachment figure, who is struggling with their own relational attachment, or they haven't necessarily had experience themselves getting a secure attachment in their childhood, oftentimes it becomes difficult for them to provide that to their children. Sometimes, and also we could say many times too, we can heal from this and pass on to future generations a secure relational experience. And so specifically the secure attachment is the goal. And as I wanted to talk about the disorganized, I think it can become very important in understanding this if this is something that we feel a pattern relationally that we feel like we have. And so what this can look like is we can have ambivalence about relationships. We can have a really hard time committing because we're not really sure, because we're especially if that person also has a disorganized attachment style. It can be challenging, right? Because part of our system is going to want to lean into relationships, especially as children, we need them to survive. But there's going to be another part of our system that's telling us that that same relationship is a source of danger. So oftentimes, what can show up later in life when somebody has this kind of attachment style that they've grown up with is, addiction, eating disorders, even OCD. And the reason being is because what can happen is if we learn that we are not getting a constant flow of, positive feelings and love and support and connection from our attachment figure, our minds are very smart and very adaptable. And we're going to learn to get that from other places. And that can become very problematic. So this can show up with addiction. If we start to use substances and discover, wow, this actually makes me feel good, and this is something that I can rely on consistently to give me that good feeling. When we're not getting that positive feeling from a relationship or attachment figure, or just in general our relationships in our life, we can learn to get that from other things. And those things oftentimes can feel good in the moment and backfire on us. Eating disorders are in the similar category in the sense that, they can provide us something pretty consistently, and they can take the place, like not successfully, but they can attempt to take the place of people relationships. And so it's really important that we can discover if, this is our attachment pattern, we can discover that it is, we can notice, how we've adapted to trying to get our needs met and to have that constant connection. Am I leaning into substances? Am I leaning into, eating, not eating, different problematic behaviors? Exercise is a huge one too. I see this a lot where that is prioritized over everything because that's a constant good feeling that can come, but that can also turn on us. So with these adaptive disorders, a lot of the time I've seen them stem from this kind of attachment style. And not always, but I think for today, I'm choosing to focus on this, and I'm looking forward to speaking about some of the other attachment styles that are out there in other videos. So a lot of the time, there's a personality disorder called borderline personality disorder, which can also reflect this kind of confusion that we can have experienced early on relationally, where it's kind of like, do I lean into relationships or do I pull back? And as kids, for survival, we're gonna lean in, but we really don't have a choice of really who our attachment figure is and how healthy they are. So we're gonna lean in for survival. Yet we can learn over time that sometimes the leaning in is gonna create a source of pain, and that's kind of the challenge that comes when we start to look at other sources, that aren't people, that aren't relationships, to meet those emotional needs, right? So again, so that can be really problematic, but there's a lot of things we can do to work through this. I think having a great therapist who understands this pattern and can help with the transition from relationships that maybe are manifesting in this way to more securely attached relationships. I think it can be helpful to have an outside person really navigating. I think this can be pretty complicated, and cause a lot of confusion. I also do something called attachment focused EMDR, where we work specifically with an attachment model, in the EMDR, desensitization and reprocessing. So I've seen that be really, really helpful. We can also do developmental trauma work with this attachment focused model. So I think that can be super helpful. There's a really great book out there called Attached, and now I can't remember the author, but it's called Attached, and it's kind of like an updated, even though it was written quite a few years ago, it's a more present day reflection of attachment styles, and has a little quiz that people can take that can help them to identify what their style is. We also have anxious attachment style, we have avoidant, and we have secure. And the anxious attachment style sometimes is also referred to as preoccupied. And so I'm going to talk about those on a different video, but I'm curious to know if you know what your attachment style is, and if you notice how this shows up in your relationships. And another interesting part of this too is the attachment styles in romantic relationships of our partner can also impact how we show up. It will impact how we show up, with our attachment. And sometimes, based on our attachment style, we're more drawn to a person that has an attachment style that maybe kind of links in with ours. I think the goal of most of us in life is to have a secure attachment in relationships, because I feel like to build a life, from the chaos that can come with disorganized attachment styles, or other combinations of how two people come together and their attachment works, it can be really challenging to build a secure, stable life on that kind of footing. And so what secure attachment looks like is really just consistency in the people that we have in our life. And I'm gonna not do the deep dive yet into secure attachment. I'm gonna save that for another video, but I wanted to describe a little bit about this this style, and they call it also anxious avoidant style. And I hope that if this relates to you or resonates, that you have gained more clarity about why sometimes relationships can be really difficult, and it can be hard to maintain consistent relationships because of this. And to know that there's absolutely pathways to re-engage relationally in ways that help us to feel safe, secure, loved, cherished, and whatever it is that we're looking for from our relationships. So thanks again, and I look forward to hearing from you guys.